welcome to the last lecture of before the summer on the Danish IAS. Since this is also a concluding solar year, calendar year for the Danish IAS, I would like to it's been a great run. We were very lucky this year. We had many almost every week, actually, lectures here. The procedures for the assistant professor position will be concluded tomorrow, and some already got offers, some already accepted it. So great people that came, that we had the possibility to listen to. Fun. And this is also the centenary of, just heard a couple of days ago, of Kennedy. So I kind of took home a couple of messages. One of that is that in a famous speech to the Americans, he said, don't ask your country what they can do for you. Ask yourself what you can do for the country. So Danish IAS is a bit like that for researchers here. Right? Don't ask university what they can do for you, but ask yourself what you can do for the university. So in effect, hopefully that we're trying to improve ourselves and the university to that thing. The other thing that Kennedy was known for was to be an idealist, right? He sent people on the moon, not himself, but he pushed very much for that program. And often I heard in certain meetings that I or we should be realists. It's true, we need to be pragmatic, but I think it's good to keep the idealism in us, and the ones who flow. So I think if we keep being a pragmatic idealist, as Kennedy was actually known for, maybe we can also go to the moon. And that is actually where the Danish IAS would love to do, right? Each of you should start thinking and behaving as a pragmatic idealist. And that I think we can then maybe change the way we think about ourselves. And this has been instrumental for me to have met Thorbjoern, which besides teaching me a lot about the Danish society too. Of course, I have a long way to go still, especially with the language. She's an ongoing process. And I probably never will learn. I will have, I actually really, it's been really a great and a lot of fun. I think it's easy to find a person with whom you can actually collaborate with so long and being able to move forward. Now, this is for the Danish IAS. We have a lot of things still to go. A long way to go before we can be home safe, but I would say that the consolidation of this year, Danish IAS, has been great. I also want to thank Anne-Christine and Charlotte for being there all the time and making sure that things are professional, because it's really important not to play games. That's it for the Danish IAS. Many more things will have to come. And I will introduce Thorbjoern. Thorbjoern is the head of Strategic Organization Design Group at STU at the Institute for at the University of Southern Denmark. And yes, the research centers around evolution and adaptive processes in organization and the way organizational design can shape these processes. That's also great. It's been instrumental for the Danish IAS, because you can imagine a theoretical physicist is a disaster when it comes to anything that's to do with the human beings. Ask my wife about that and my kids. But I think that's it. I think this is really great, and he has been having many positions, and at least it's too long to actually go through that. So we'll leave the floor to Thorbjoern.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to give this talk today. We're going to talk about human organizations, and the title, fairly modest, seeking principles. We're still looking out there. And as the image illustrates, these guys, they are doing some work. So human organizations are good for many things. They're good if you don't know where to go during the day. But more seriously, they can be seen as basically a fundamental form of social technology that serves two very essential purposes. One is division of labor, as Adam Smith famously laid out. And the other one is, once you've divided the labor, you need to get it integrated back in. So you need to integrate the effort of that labor. That entails processes such as cooperation and coordination. As Francesco said, well, once upon a time we put a man on the moon. Behind that was an organization. Later on, in some spectacular failure, that was also mainly, at least according to the Feynman report, a failure of the human organization. What I'm going to today is basically walk you through some of the research we do. So it's perhaps a little bit impressionistic talk, giving you different slices of the research we do in our research group. The big picture. So human organizations, we look at them as involved entities basically. This is a timeline. So there's a co-evolution of genes and culture as laid out in theory and work on anthropology, scientific anthropology. For example, marriage patterns in Tibetan culture are co-evolved between genes and culture. So are actually words, linguistic expressions, and actually genetic expressions. So a famous example is here, this country, we can see them, they're right out there, the yellow things, we call in English dandelion. The Danish word is mælkebøtte, which in English would be milk carrier. And actually, you can see that as you move north, more and more words actually contain the expression milk. And it has been tracked actually that as norms of culture has been pushing people in the north to overcome lactose intolerance for the benefits actually of absorbing vitamin D, thus overcoming what they need to do that as you move in places where the sun couldn't help you get it. As we go further on, bodily habits, language, the ability to communicate, facilitating coordination in hunting teams, customs, and writing systems where we now can freeze what we have said to each other, and we can send messages. Building on these layers, each of these episodes is actually a major transition in the evolution of the human organization. With each of these happened an evolution. Judicial laws, that is laws that are not only written down, but you also have an institution of law that can pass out judgment. What does that mean? It means that property rights can be secured. You can secure property rights, you have a basis for actually developing business organizations and other organizations that can put on further layers than was possible if you think of a simple team of hunter and gatherers. Technological evolution comes further on that. So that is sort of the big picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into that and give you a few slices. If you look at that, we've come pretty far since we started a few years ago, and we were wondering, how do we speak? So this is the Tesla factory. What's interesting there is actually at the shop floor, the people are removed now. So the co-evolution of technology and human forms of cooperation. Go a little bit back. Car factories had different organizations at the shop floor to ensure cooperation and coordination. And innovation of how to do this promoted actually technological evolution that again promoted evolution in, shall we say, human organization. So what I want to do is actually take a picture on that. So the first principle we can talk about in the evolution of human organization is the principle of selection. So broadly, on a large time scale, human organizations owe their development to a process of evolution driven by selection. Here's an illustration. So on the right you see an Oldsmobile. It's not because it's old it's called that. It's actually one of the first car factories in the US. The guy who actually came up with that factory, started, the entrepreneur, his last name was Oldsmobile. And actually was Olds. And his first name was Ransom. You can figure out, I still think maybe one should look into that name. It seems sort of interesting, but never mind that. Here is the 1966 model. Okay. So these are illustrations of this time scale. So basically here you see the American car industry and its evolution. What you see is an empirical signature that is very typical. So you have an initial phase here where the first producers start. Then you have a phase of growth up to a peak where new producers start either because they are smitten by enthusiasm or along the way because they see the profit potential. So I want to try my hand at building a car factory myself. I can see it goes very well for these people. They get respect in society and it's damn interesting. Let me try. Okay. So Mr. Ford went after that and so on and so forth. Now, these start small, at small scale, the factories. Then they grow. There's entry. So entry is basically, are you able to get into the industry? It's not only whether you want or not. Can you persuade your bank? At some point you need to start up at a little larger scale. It's not enough with a shack and you try to make your garage car. You need a factory. Thus, you need investors. Are you able to convince them that you can produce in a way that justifies the loan that you need? More precisely, can you produce at a level where the price you can get for your car can actually cover your cost and perhaps a little bit more so you can earn a profit? You don't know. It's experimentation, so you go in there. Those who fail, they exit.
Sorry, what is on the axis?
Or the axis is the number of firms, basically. So this is the number of firms, and this is the timeline. So you see the number of firms increase up to a peak, and then we have what we refer to as a shakeout. During the shakeout, during this period, production becomes more and more efficient, competition becomes fierce, and during the period of shake-up, all the inefficient firms basically leave the industry, which leaves a handful of firms in a stable, steady state. So this is a very, very typical pattern. If you take the US tire industry, it has exactly the same signature. What differs is basically the height of the shake-up, and the question is, what determines that? And what determines this pattern? And how efficient is this configuration of firms? One would expect, since there's been fierce competition, that these firms that are left there are extremely efficient. Competition is supposed to drive efficiency. On the other hand, is that necessarily true? So to look into that, we actually created a model. So this model is a combination of simulation and analytical work. So basically the model works like this. You have a short-term equilibrium, which is a best response equilibrium. That means each firm goes into the industry if its cost value, which is given at random, is less than the price observed. All who fulfill this criterion go into the industry. Then a viable equilibrium is computed, that is, maybe too many came in. So once they've been competing, some of them go out. All right? The underlying distribution is given at random. So we start out with 10, cohort of 10 firms. Those who can make it stay. Then a new round, new 10, and we have a process of exit and entry that more or less mimics what we saw before. What we create in this model is, first of all, the signature exactly as you saw before. It's perhaps easier to see it here. So you have the same initial phase of growth of the industry, more and more firms come in. These firms grow. Then we have the shakeout, where we have the competitive forces create a level of efficiency that most cannot fulfill, so they exit. And then we have a stable state. Now, what we do is basically, when we compute their best response, we assume they know rationally what they want, but they cannot get there. And get there means they cannot scale up the output to the level that is necessary for them to get exactly where they want. So we have a scale adjustment parameter, it's called delta. That means you can go, for example, 1% to your desired output. In the new equilibrium, you compute a new one, and so on and so forth. All right. Why does that matter? It matters because that parameter can basically is the decisive parameter that adjusts the profile of the process. So using this model, we can actually match it to observed empirical signatures, and then we can determine or identify the underlying properties of the process relative to this theory. All right. We can do one more thing. We know that organizations make little mistakes, even universities know it. Right. So a compact way to express this is basically to assume there is a little error to your cost value. Suppose this error is a noise that is normally distributed. That means equal probability goes up and down, and low probability it's extreme. We get the same process, but here you see firms. This is a window of the last 30 periods. This goes on, as you can see, for 1,000 periods, where you have the long-term evolution premised on the short-term equilibrium computed in each and every period. Okay. These are the last 30 periods. These are the cost values. On account of these jiggles, random jiggles, they go up and down. If they become too high, the firm can no longer stay, and it goes up. All right? What you see there, the gray, light gray, that's basically those that went down and up, and then poof, they went out because now the cost is too high. So you can enter like these 3 guys here with reasonable cost values, but at some point, when you go through this stochastic minefield, at some point your cost value is going to be too high, so you're out. What does that mean? It means stability in this industry is a handful or two. It's called oligopoly configuration economics of firms will be present. And if they happen to scale up at the same point, there will be a configuration which is stable for a very long time. But at some point, a random incident will make this configuration disappear and a new will assemble. All right? What does that mean? It basically means we can now make predictions regarding the concentration of the industry at different points in the industry life cycle, and we can make predictions here about the efficiency properties conditional on the error rates of these firms. So that is one example that is quite important in the field known as firm strategy. We'll go one bit further with the same model. There's actually a paradox in the literature So there are two stylized observations. And one is persistent firm level differences in resources and capabilities exist. Why? Basically because when firms are successful, a good deal of what they do is idiosyncratic and cannot be codified. That means even if you want to copy a successful firm, you can't get it quite right. So that's called an isolation mechanism. For that reason, we know, that's an empirical signature, there are persistent differences between industries, but also within an industry, persistent differences among these firms. There's not reversal to the mean. There will always be a spread, even in equilibrium. Since we have that, that means some of these firms are better and some are worse. Some are more efficient, some are less efficient. Wouldn't it be reasonable then, when they scale up, to think some of them scale up faster than others? But they don't. That is observation 2. Because empirical evidence also says that growth follows Shibrat's law. That means basically growth is proportional to size and not proportional to your capability. These two cannot both be true apparently. They are at odds. That's why it's called a paradox. How to reconcile those two? So basically, in equilibrium, small shocks to cost values, if they are symmetrically distributed around 0, then you can have also shocks that put the firm quite a bit away from where it wants to be, but there will symmetrically be another firm at the other end that goes from low to high or from high to low. One is contracting, one is scaling up. And even though this process is systematic, the distribution of this process is exactly random. Thus, using an extended version of the model from before, we are able to show actually two critical points. First, the beta value in the so-called growth equation must be 1. Then you have Shibrat law. And the zero correlation should be 0. Even though what they do is systematic at the micro level. And these are fulfilled for these two values. This is the level of the noise. So basically these are the little jiggles, the little random changes in the cost values. All right? What does that mean? It means these are not empirically plausible. These two bands are the empirically possible. Thus we can not make a prediction, but we can make an identification. We can say, here we have around 0 correlation. Actually, if you have a larger sample, it goes to 0. We can then say, and this is phase 3, this is the steady state from before, where you only have a handful left. Then we can say noise values from such a distribution, such a noise generating process, will be in the level of about 0.25 of your cost value. This fits. Now we have an explanation for the paradox. Second, with this identification, new work can then go out and test, is this error rate what we observe? And then we have a complete theory. Now, this was the high level. So, what happened to the organization? Remember these lads working hard? So I forgot about that, didn't I? Not really, but what I assumed was all that's relevant for the organization is the inner cost value and a little noise. It's a simplification that is perhaps extreme. So let's look into one aspect of the organization and what happens inside the organization. Organizational learning basically can be described by these 3 processes. A firm search for new alternatives. It will experiment with these. It will also screen the properties of these new alternatives. In our car example, you can take the tire producers, new processes, new chemical materials to produce these tires with. Screening. What is the property of this tire when it's wet, when it's dry, how long does it last, and so on and so forth. Feedback. So once you're happy about that, you implement and then you go back. Medical research, of course, has an extremely well-structured way of doing these processes over very long time periods. So I would like to show you a window for each of them that actually is something we've done in our research. So one is basically, in this field we very much use what is known as the NK model, or similar models, for analysis of organizations. So one example is basically we say an NK model has a bit string of zeros and ones, and we assume they're not, these bits are not genes, but they are firm policies. So the firm policies can be a product design, it can be elaborate, it can be simple. Another policy could be a marketing campaign or a way to organize your production and so on and so forth. So this is a string of firm policies. Now, another assumption is based on the premise that managers have been shown empirically to be pretty myopic. So one way to actually capture that is to assume they're basically doing local search. What does that mean? That means they flip one bit at a time, or one Hamming distance, if you wish, to be technical. And what they do is then they're presented with a landscape that is, in a firm, the task environment of the firm, which can be more or less complex. And it's a wonderful model to study this. So one piece of work is basically, if you do the normal search process like this, you put these firms at different random points, like throw a little box in a landscape, and they go one step up until they cannot go any further. How far can you get, depending on the complexity? It was introduced in the field of organizations around 97, 20 years ago. So a standard result is you go so far by some level of performance, fitness, and then if we introduce noise, basically instead of, so what they usually do is basically each time you flip, you compare what you have to the new lead generated alternative. If the new is better, you take it, otherwise you take the status quo. So you can actually assess the new minus the old. If you do that in a perfect way, you have this step function there, step function, and you only take the new if it's better. Even if the new is a little bit worse, you don't take it. Suppose you have noise in this process.
How do you define better for your bit strings? I'm just trying to get a sort of...
Okay, sorry, by fitness.
So you just have some criteria. Do you have some optimum bit string which is sort of deemed to be good, and you're
Yes,
just comparing distance to that or something?
No, you basically start in a random place.
Right.
And then you proceed by experimentation. So it's capturing this experimentation, search for better alternatives. You start blind at a random place, you flip one bit, see, is the fitness higher? Yes, take it, no, I stay with my status quo.
So my question was, how is the fitness actually defined?
The fitness is basically generated by draws from a uniform distribution. It doesn't matter. Actually, you can take normal distribution, other distributions, exponential, whatever. But uniform is sort of what we normally use. Anyway, this noise, suppose you basically take this angle and increase more noise. If you do it to this point, with the slope of this guy is 0, basically you have a coin. You flip a coin. Makes no sense. So suppose you do it a little bit more, alpha 10 is this line. Basically, we see that the performance failed. Now, this is a well-known result. You add noise to such a problem. If you have a complex landscape, you basically can improve your performance. The difference here is, of course, the noise is intelligent. A mutation, a random mutation, would basically be a line you flip up or down. So that's the innovation here. So basically, one principle, intelligent noise, can be beneficial. The other one, organizations can actually tune this. Suppose you have managers, maybe people actually have dials like that in their head. Maybe they look in a different way. Look at that in a moment. Suppose we have people and we want them to change the slope, either to be more cautious or to be more experimental. Then actually we know which organizations to place them in so as to tune the property of the organization conditional on the property of the individual. If we can measure the individual, we can actually do some very, very interesting things. How do humans search? Stefan Billinger, who is a member of our research group, has created the alien game. The framing is basically a bunch of aliens that search for improvements. They're not presented with bit strings, but with symbols that actually capture the underlying bit strings. And thus they go ahead. So this is the Hamming distance. Hamming distance 1 was what I talked about before. Humans start much higher. They change many things at a time. Then they reduce it, but not to 1. They actually go here and then they go up a little bit. This also has to do with the incentive structure of that particular game. So if you punish them, you could actually make them more cautious. But still, it's quite remarkable the way they do. So what do humans do here? First of all, what the work Stefan is doing, a lot of extensions here, basically go into extracting search procedures from actually human beings. The next step is to place them in organizations and to see how do these organizations influence this. Can we tune it? There's a third aspect of this that goes way beyond this, that is machine learning versus human cognition. And actually we know, also from colleagues in Aarhus working on these problems, that humans are better at defining, shall we say, representations. Once you have one, just let the machines loose. You have no chance against the machine. But to create new, shall we say, mental spaces for entirely new problems, beautiful new discoveries, that's where humans are good. Because the machines, at least so far, have an extremely hard time in defining the new spaces. Whereas we are extremely good at that. If you wish, creating heuristics. Screening functions. Another way to obtain screening functions is basically ask a lot of people. I could ask you, you see this bull here, and then we have it here. Maybe you've seen it in Danish television, it was done here. So one of our lads in the subgroup, Ulrik Nash, he basically has been the scientific advisor for Danmarks Radio in Alle mod 1 show, where they actually had the ox in there. And then you could sit with your iPhone and say, how much is the weight? All of that derived from Francis Galton in his later years. I think he was in his 80s, mid-80s, went to a competition in the west of England, Fat, Stock and Poultry Exhibition. In the fall of 1906, present day, he went there, and then he saw that 800 tickets were given out to the attendees, and they could write the weight of the animal. Not as you see it, but actually butchered and dressed, as they say. Okay. And Galton was very skeptical about the common man's ability to actually be sensible, which fed into, back then, discussions about elite democracy. Elite democracy basically said, okay, we cannot have the great mass of people voting. We should select some they could vote on.
Only the French.
There you are. So anyway, he expected, so he got the idea, let me collect all what people have written here, and it was a competition, so they really made their best guess. And then he computed the average of what people have written, and this was the mean guess, and it was about less than a third pound away from the truth. So he was like, perhaps broad democracy will have a chance anyway. You know? More to the point, the observation of this seems to be two distributions. First, it's skewed. Second, the tails are a bit too long for what you would expect. So maybe two distributions can actually capture it. So some of the work that we've done in the unit, that Knudsen has done, is basically to show there's a very simple model that can produce, this is from his model, and it reproduces this exact, and it shows it's a mixture of experts and novices. Exactly as in that fair. Because many of the people who went there were butchers or farmers. Actually, the ratio was 5-1 of experts to novices. And if you treat this model with a setting where you can tune, here's expert, here's novice, and what they look at is cues. A cue is, for example, how long this, how big this, what is the... So the model gives the people 10 cues, and then you can reproduce this from the model, and then we have a theoretical understanding of the underlying mechanism, and then we can get to work. So, once again, illustrating what we're doing. But how do they screen these humans?
But still back to the other one,
Yeah.
on average, the novices do just as well as the experts.
Yes. I mean, the average is better than almost any expert, save one or two. There's another point to this. There's a skew. It's not symmetrical. And actually, by looking at whether the skew is one way or the other, the theory now allows us to say, who are these people? If it's skewed one way, we can say it's full of novices, people who don't know what they basically are. If it's skewed the other way, we can say there's an overweight of experts. And actually mixing novices and experts leads to a symmetrical distribution and probably the best result. So experts can actually jointly make things worse. It's a further commentary to what we said there. It's quite interesting to get into these things.
Do experts overestimate or underestimate?
Experts, I don't know. Ulrik knows, talk to him.
Okay.
Another thing is, this Alle mod En show in Danmarks Radio. If you haven't seen it, there was one expert against all of Denmark. Now, the problem was, how can you make sure that the one expert will win half the time? You can actually take this model and tune it so that the crowd doesn't get too clever. That would ruin the show, and that's the expertise. So basically, he can tune the cleverness of the crowd.
So you're saying that the program is rigged?
So let's call this outreach.
Oh, not rigged.
Right. So we're interested in actually, I've shown you we're going into this and say, but we made assumptions about the noise before. Remember these lines. But do people really have these lines? How does it look? So screening functions are dear to us because once we have these, we can construct decision structures. So we gave them a task. So Michael Christensen, who is here, right there, Zlat, created this task. It's a two-dimensional task. When we created it, he said, no, 2 dimensions, any fool can do that. Come on, we're not in kindergarten. So we tried a 3-dimensional and no one could solve it. So 2-dimensional was basically the position of this thing and the size of the circle gives you a payoff. There's a negative region and a positive region. What we do is basically put people in front of this and try to get it right. And we give them feedback, and the feedback will basically tell them where they are and be the basis of a learning process so they can learn the underlying payoff function. Feedback can be symmetric or asymmetric. Symmetric, you get feedback both if you fail or if you have success. Asymmetric, you only get feedback if you have success. Based on this, we can extract screening functions. So the quality is the underlying payoff distribution, and this is how good people are to say yes and no, the violet line. This is the fitted line, the fit is pretty good. So that's a nice S-form curve, and this is the asymmetric feedback here. Fantastic. Now we have screening functions. I said we can tune it. What if we put it in very simple organizations? These are known for the literature as a hierarchy, Stiglitz hierarchy. It's a very simple one. It basically works so. Here you have job candidates, for example. The first one looks at it and say, no, these are not good. And the remaining stack goes to the second guy. If both accept, then the organization accepts. So in other words, it's an AND gate. This is exactly the same. If both reject, it's rejected, otherwise it's accepted. However, note, there are 2 ways to accept here. So from the point of view of people who sit in this organization and want to figure out how it works with respect to getting things accepted, this is more complicated than this one. The question is, will putting people in these organizations change anything? It's very easy to compute how the organization should work if nothing changes. This is just, if the screening function is f, this is just f squared. Right? So that basically pushes it down, it becomes more cautious, and this is the symmetrical going in the optimistic way. Easy. But, will people change? I don't know if you have a guess, but let's see. Do you have any guesses? What would you do? Suppose you're here. Would you do the same as before?
So
if
the
you
two
were?
agents communicate or not?
No.
Does-
Sorry, very good, thanks. They don't talk. No communication.
Neither case.
No.
So
No,
what
no.
does those lines means in media?
Here, these.
Dashed lines, no, the dashed lines.
Oh, thanks for question. So this means accept. I accept to this. I accept to this. I accept for the organization. So these guys we hire. The dotted lines means we reject.
But just in between the two agents. That was,
Reject.
okay.
So, for example, I can send, this goes random to this or this, and then I reject to this guy, and he must look before we can reject finally.
I see.
Suppose you were sitting in this. Yeah? Would you do the same as before?
It seems that agent 2 would be more picky than agent 1.
Would be more picky. Interesting. Cool. Why?
Because he would be the second measure, the second filter, and he would interpret his job as being that. So
I see. That's nice. So that means, in a way, he says, perhaps this guy, since he knows I'm checking him, he becomes a little more lazy. Okay. But suppose there's symmetric thinking, and he says, since I'm checking, since this guy knows that I will be, say, very picky, you know, I can be lazy. But this guy can also say, nah, don't think so. He has figured that one out, so therefore he will actually react to that, and he will be very picky, so I can be lazy. Well, this is called strategic effects. It's very interesting to figure that out empirically. So let's take a look. So here we are. The lines. First of all, you could also predict that the agents would understand the actually the structures and would counter the bias if they were extremely clever. In that case, they'll be at the red. Now, suppose nothing happened, they'll be the blue. That was the blue line from before. Suppose they're getting a little more lazy. So it sort of looks like there's some kind of laziness going on with both. At least they're getting, the organization has the effect actually of these guys behaving as if they are strategizing on the supply of effort. They're supplying less. The other structure. This is prediction if they knew exactly how it worked. No chance. Okay. More interestingly, from before, and putting this guy in the organization makes no difference at all. So no strategic effect in that one, strategic effect in that one. So we're down to the very nitty-gritty of how organizations work and affect people. So what? Basically, our conjecture is that here it's too complicated for them to compute all the way through to the accept. Relative to this, where it's pretty simple to see how should we do to sort of game the system. So, principle, complex organizations mitigate strategic effects. Meaning, if people game the system, put them into a complex system that they don't know how to work. And then they will do, you know, behave as we want them. All right. Illustration from a case study. Here's a banker. He takes credit. Here's his twin. Or very close twin. And basically, he can say yes or no, or he can pass to this guy and he can say yes or no. Back then I had a very good master student who worked in this bank and was allowed to go through 3 years of credit applications, 209 in total. And we were also allowed to send fake credit 40 through the system. So once again do this exercise. And since these had known properties, we could extract them. The first guy looked like this. So it's not the nice S shape, but you know, pretty good. And banking is difficult, so maybe it's okay. If you don't own the bank. The next guy had a 10-year average of 6 years, and these were drawn from the best of the level A employees. This looks weird. It means that here he's more or less acting as a coin flipper, even though these are the best. He should be up here. And here is allowing crap to go through. Crap meaning applications that really cost money. Should be down here. So we asked ourselves, why is that? Thought a bit about it and said, maybe this is a learning process. Suppose we make a model where they start flat and they learn from actually what they do. So the more they do, the more the curve goes to what it should be here in this domain and towards here in this domain. However, people also forget. So supposing a level of memory decay, could we recreate this? That was the task. So we created a model. I'll not go through this now. Anyway, so it's a model that had the property. We send a stream of projects through this system, and they learn from it. The curves. Okay, what happens here? So basically, here you see our first twin from before. He learns, he becomes pretty good. Since this guy becomes pretty good, he takes away all the projects from this domain. So this guy sees almost nothing. Since he doesn't see anything, and since there's memory decay, he forgets what a bad project looks like. Boom. So that's good. But given the structure, which is a constraint of the problem, this doesn't work, really. Because the better he becomes, the more he lets through in the good. So he keeps on seeing the good stuff and learning from it. what to do? So we asked this guy. So basically, this is a recipe for success. You need two things. Ignorance, we have that. Confidence, okay, we get that. And then success should be self-assured. So what does that mean? It basically means if this guy is cocky and confident, he can basically accept on his own accord or reject on his own accord. In that case, boom, we can fit all the facts. Because now this guy takes away also from the good domain here. All right. So what does that mean? It means actually, if we look at such a learning system, and using the model, we can fit the signature of the data to get an idea about the underlying process. And in this sense, basically, we see mutual adaptation. People adapt to each other. And actually, they adapt as a perfect statistical filter. They learn from the information they receive. The network position is critical. And actually, if you sit in someplace and the guy who sits, your assistant is too good, and you don't get to see the good stuff and bad stuff, you get robbed of learning opportunities. So because of too good employees, you may actually end up as a fool at the end, or even in the middle of your career. I'm not saying you should have bad employees, but I'm just saying be careful, right? You can be robbed of learning opportunities. Decisions based on self-confidence basically means that all confident advisors can rob you of learning opportunities once again. They do it and you don't get to do it yourself. Very important. Finally, suppose you have this system that we saw, and one day the level 1 guy is sick and level 2 comes down, God help us all. So to take away, organizational role strongly influences individual performance. In another piece of work, we actually show that learning curves that can be observed in firms may entirely be produced by the roles and nothing to do with the skill or competence of the individual. Problem? To disentangle these two effects in empirical research. Right. This will drop. So here are some principles that we've been passing through along the way. The big one, selection processes shape human organization. Exactly how? Lots of research. Going a little bit deeper. Rate of scale adjustment in firms shape industry dynamic structure and performance. So we can get a grip on that. Rate of scale adjustment reconciles Gibran law, as we saw. Intelligent noise, beneficial in complex work, and noise can be tuned by these organizations. However, on the one hand, lo and behold, if you have simple organizations that people can game, the other way around, if you have complex organizations, you may be safe because people cannot look through the way to game them. Role influences performance. So one takeaway will be basically when we look at performance and we condition our inference about people who work in organizations, we should separate out the organizational role component as well as the individual component. And this I didn't go into details with, but here we show basically, paradoxically, inertia can be a great source of innovation. I'll leave that to another day. Big picture. Components of organization. We started out with division of labor and integrating that divided labor. This can be thought of as 2 by 2 universal processes of an organization. So the big picture evolution of organizations have come with these basic processes. task division. You map goals to your task. Task allocation, you decide who does what. Incentive structure, you motivate people. Information structure, to solve coordination problems, people need to be able to predict each other. So that's what information structures do. So jointly these solve the two problems of organization, cooperation and coordination. We spend our time here. Another day we can go here or here. So it should be about it. And this is the team. So thanks to the sub members. And what you've seen are a few selected slices. Much more, of course, to be talked about. Perhaps after the lecture when we go upstairs or another day. Thank you so much.
Sure, so now we have a few minutes for questions.
Okay, yeah.
You covered a lot of ground, Toby, and I know to focus just on a part of it. And your view seems to be internal within the organization. And I can't help but think, if we're thinking about a business like the auto industry that you started with, that external forces actually have to also play a dominant role. I mean, are they making a product that the customer wants? You know, what about the needs and wants of the environment outside the organization that's impacting whether or not this organization is successful?
Very good. So basically, what I had with the auto industry was basically competition. And all the internal stuff in the organization was rolled down into one term called the cost. Actually, in that case, the marginal cost, or the variable cost. It's identical in that example. Now, the problem you want to solve determines how deep you want to go into the organization. So you may want to look at that scale and say, that's enough characterization of the organization I need. Later on, I went deep into the organization. And yes, I totally forgot about the task environment, or almost. It was still present. For example, in these models of screening, the task environment is the stream that comes through the organization. More to the point, you can also think about the way these organizations are structured. Jury voting. Jury voting has spread. So once a convention or an institution emerges, it tends to spread. So organizations learn from each other. Sometimes good things, sometimes bad things. So these organizational arrangements surely will spread in a diffusion process. Some of them are spread by consultants, and to some extent a lot of fads and fashion are involved there. So you can actually go to epidemiology and have fashion cycles very closely mimicking how you see spread of disease in biological populations. Very good point. So I did not present it yet, but you're right. Suzanne?
So very interesting. I'm not sure I understand everything, but I really like your example with the screening process. And I'm thinking that one could project that to the way we teach and mentor.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you think of
Any
that?
ideas?
No, but I mean, you can, by, acting as the number one and taking the, like a very confident first screener, you take away the possibility of number two to really learn.
Right. That's actually a very good idea for basically structuring and designing teamwork.
Yeah.
I can come up with another example. We have a PhD starting this fall in sketch. And
That's a good place to start.
right. I don't need to say more, I suppose. Maybe we can improve matters there. Another example we've discussed, it's not really running yet. Suppose you have defectors. That means it could be people from China wanting to go to the US, and the US Marines, not sure. Are these secret agents, or are these innocent people in need of, asylum? So what they do is take interviews. Suppose you make a screening process where you actually use a combination of screening technology and crowdsourcing to improve the detection of the right type of these people, to reduce both type 1 and type 2 error. That means not accusing one who's innocent of the opposite, and so on. So that's another example. It's a little more colorful, and in my abstract I promised to say something about war. So that was the promise fulfilled.
Were there questions?
Yeah, thank you for this kind of hopelessly romantic talk. It's sort of a very classic view that, you know, sort of there's mathematical principles that underlie social order. But my question is, so when you talk of evolutionary principles, you fully focus on selection. But the other half of evolution, of course, is variation and selection. And I'm not sure, because you probably couldn't go into it, but my impression was that by and large the variation here was seen as occurring in random, right? Or having a normal distribution. So why should that be the case? I mean, if we have 275 car companies, you know, I mean, are they not bound to make all the same mistakes? Isn't that rather typical? I mean, voters seem to do that. Trump voters probably did that. Right?
That's what a mistake.
That's a bias.
It's a very,
Bias.
yeah. I mean, it's a very good point, and part of it should be, I should perhaps have explained what I mean by selection. I have one extremely simple version of it, but in a three-word explanation, I would say descent with modification. That's actually Darwin's original phrase. Unpacking that means actually a selection process is a process by which these things that occur in this organization, are replicated in a way that causes some variation. But the replication is conditional on the organization's interaction with the environment. So you can say interaction causes differential replication and also differential noise. I just didn't want to complicate it. However, I totally agree with you, and that's part of, shall we say, more elaborate models. That said, oftentimes we actually like to simplify it to a very, very naive version of selection. You could talk about it as subset selection. Choose a subset of something, and you go on with that, weeding out a subset selection. However, in more refined models, advanced models, your point comes totally through. That is, the creation of variation is not necessarily random, but is part of, actually endogenous part of the process.
Any further questions?
So, how much of your conclusions on sort of how to stimulate organisations can actually be boiled down to policy? There's a big thing in Australia at the moment where I'm visiting from, that businesses don't do enough R&D, for example, so the government is now throwing huge amounts of money to stimulate R&D, and of course it does that in sometimes very good ways and sometimes very ham-fisted ways. Are there any, are there any sort of concrete recommendations for how government can actually approach stimulation of business in any of this work? You may not have mentioned them or gone into enough detail.
I actually I prefer both managers and representatives of governments to look at our work and hopefully get ideas.
Yeah.
So that's where I stand on policy recommendations. End of story.
Any further questions? I actually have one thing that was when you showed the picture of for the automobile. And then I also kept in my mind the PC or media. So it seems that the more they become global, the harder it is for them to survive. And at the end, you only have you can count them on one hand the number of actually multinationals, right? They survive that. So in your model, on the other hand, there was almost 50% of those will actually survive. Like you had in the model that the plateau So what actually controls the how many survive in the end?
Very good.
Because I wasn't clear to me.
What controls how many survive is basically in the steady state is the noise term. The higher the noise up to a point, the more will survive, and then it goes down again. And the other point is basically the forgiveness of the demand function. So a more strict demand function will have fewer survive, and you can end up with a monopoly. Yeah. Depending on demand conditions. So that function will control it basically. Yeah.
Very good. So you deserve that. For the questions you answered.
Thank you.